Well, the last 3 days have been a blast in Indy, but at least for us, aka me and Mike, all good things must come to an end. We are back in Cincinnati. Andrew Gillis, he's cooler than us. He's going to be in Indy for another day, and we're going to have him back on Friday as he talks about his observations that he's been seeing during the combine workouts and such. But we're going to have some fun because I still think we're the cool kids. Welcome into another NFL Combine offseason edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. Muhammad Ahmad and Mike Nizick with you for a little fireside chat on this Thursday night. And we talked a lot about what the coaches have been saying, like Lou Anarumo and Brian Callahan. We talked even more about Duke Tobin and Zach Taylor, what that means for the direction of the offseason and certain players. I wanted to look a little bit more internally from a draft point of view. We've talked about so many names, so many characters and people to watch in this combine, and we're not even going to go through the whole list of names because we'd be doing a 10-hour pod, but there's a few names I wanted to touch on that I think we haven't really talked about that are specific to the Bengals. This is one name we've talked about, but there's so much more to him that I think is worth discussing, and that's Ivan Pace Jr., the linebacker out of UC Cincinnati. Cincinnati kid who we mentioned, grew up here, lived in the state of Ohio his whole life. Mike, he said something interesting to me yesterday, Wednesday, that I think is worth touching on. And he said that if he was not 5'10", if he was, 2, 3 inches taller, he thinks he has the potential to be a top 5 pick. Now, most boards, including PFF, kind of have him as a mid-round pick. I don't even think he's in the PFF top 100, not at least going into this week. But he has a lot of confidence that he is the real deal. He led UC in sacks, tackles for loss last year. He's got freakish athleticism for someone his size, and I think he's going to show off his coverage instincts throughout the week. But what do you think about this Ivan Pace kid? Is the hype real? Is this guy really better than he is on paper, or do you think it's just the feel-good hometown Cincinnati kid factor kicking in?
I'm not sure what hype. I mean, he's not in the top 100. He's a mid-round projection. He's a small linebacker, and I think that most prospects say if you were taller, or especially a quarterback, if a guy's 3 inches shorter than he needs to be, it kills his draft prospects or kills his college prospects. I mean, he's a fine player. I think when you look at what the Bengals said the other day, that they're really happy with their linebacker room. They might need depth, but I don't see them sort of making it, reaching for somebody that really doesn't kind of fit the bill for what they're looking for.
So if you are the Bengals, what is the bill of what you're looking for at linebacker? I know you mentioned the height aspect, but what else would you say fits the bill for what they need, assuming Jermaine Pratt walks, which I want to talk about him in a second, but what is that kind of bill you're talking about?
Well, I don't think they're. I mean, from what they said, I don't think they're looking. I think they are going to slot in Davis Gaither as a starter, and roll out Logan Wilson. I think they're going to be looking for depth. Maybe you get somebody in the late rounds, or a bargain free agent just to provide depth. Somebody that that can do a lot of things that they want. They don't use a lot of three linebacker sets. Utilize their guys a lot in coverage. So I mean, they're looking for a guy that could do all that. Very hybrid kind of scheme that they have. So typically don't rush the passer a lot. So you can get some value because you're not looking for those linebackers that draw very big salaries, a lot of attention in free agency. So that's kind of what I think they're just going to roll with what they have at linebacker going into the next season.
It definitely seems feasible. And to kind of touch on that, maybe this is stretching it, but maybe this is something worth reading into. If they're not going to invest in that mid-round pick, whether it be Ivan Pace or someone else who's available in that kind of mid-round or even mid to late round without being super late, like you mentioned, does that mean that they're planning for a future with Akeem Davis-Gaither and Logan Wilson? Like, do you think they're confident that those guys will be there long term, that they don't need to get someone now? Or maybe if they're gonna get somebody, assuming you don't have either of them in 2024 because they're both going into contract years, Davis, Gaither, and Wilson, do you think they're gonna kind of plan for that later then? Do you think that's just something they're not worried about even in the long term or just not right now?
Well, I think Davis Gaither's probably a wait and see, but they talked about looking at what Logan Wilson might want in terms of an extension. I think those are decisions that will get made once they kind of figure out some of these free agents, kind of what direction they're going with. I could see them um, reloading because it's a position that I think, from their perspective isn't as important as the others. It's
Right.
something I think you could plug and play more, which we've talked a lot about on the podcast. But I think it's a spot where it's not of prime area of concern right now. I don't think for the Bengals because I think they're happy with what they have, and even if they lose Jermaine Pratt, they feel confident with who they have locked up for 2023 at least.
We've talked so much about Jermaine Pratt and his cryptic tweets, and we're saying this on a Thursday. He tweeted about 9 hours ago before this podcast, "Love is love, but loyalty is real." And someone asked him, "What's money then?" And he replied, "Money is the root of all evil." I mean, his tweets have been very interesting. I don't think we've sugarcoated that at all, but do you think that's just pretty much like, if he hasn't given it away already, is that just him saying, "I'm out, see you later, until next time," if there is a next time?
I mean, I don't really read into tweets like that. I mean, I think if he calls out the Bengals specifically, like he has in the past about the third down stuff, I mean, that stuff, I mean, obviously is about the team. And I think you could, easily, you don't have to interpret anything. But other than that, you cover college and these athletes tweet out stuff. Somebody's like, "Oh, are you transferring?" And it's like, "No, that was about a sandwich I ate at lunch." I was unhappy. So it's like, I'm not in the business of reading tweets, like interpreting what somebody means because, who knows? I think the bigger ones are the ones where he's criticized the team or critics, just kind of speculated, he was frustrated about not being used on third down. Obviously that I think speaks more to where his state of mind at than, some vague tweets about, life or whatever.
It's funny because Lou Anarumo was asked about that. We didn't mention this on Wednesday, but he was asked about those tweets, among others, and he was like, "Oh, I love that he's a competitor. I love that he's, got that feistiness in him." But that's just his way of saying, "Oh well," like, he's not gonna say how he really feels because obviously he doesn't want to say it. But I mean, it makes sense. Like, I think that's just, in that situation, like, what else are you gonna say if you're Jermaine Pratt? Which again, I think there's debate to that as to whether, it was him, or I think really it was more down to the sub packages they played, the different situations in game where maybe they wanted ADG in there. But I think where we can both agree and pivot is that it's not important in terms of the linebacker position, at least right now. I do think what is more important, and we can weigh in on this, and getting into some names, but what is more important and should be important isn't just the secondary, but cornerback, I think, is going to be really important. We've talked about Eli Apple. He spoke like a man who's pretty much on his way out. Same, I think, is going to happen with Trey Flowers. I think that's very likely, especially if they can't come to a cheaper deal with him. So that leaves you with Alan George, Cam Taylor-Britt, and Chidobe Awuzie, and you need depth behind those guys. So I think there are some names that come to mind. And again, I don't want to go through the whole list. There's just a few names that stick out to me that I want to discuss because they might fit the bill for what the Bengals are looking for, and these are not unrealistic options. One of them is Emmanuel Forbes, and I mention him because he's a Mississippi State cornerback, number one. He played in the SEC, 6 interceptions last year, 2 pick sixes. He actually spoke with the Bengals. He told me today that he spoke with Lou Anarumo and Zach Taylor, and he actually liked Lou Anarumo's direct style. He even said he models himself after Martin Emerson, who plays for the Cleveland Browns. They played together in college. And that's a guy who sticks out to me because, he's a little bit taller. He's about 6 foot, really good in press man coverage. Clark Phillips is another name from Utah. Ironically, had 6 interceptions. Hasn't met with the Bengals, but he said when he looks at their secondary, he's like, "Put me in there." So I think you have two guys who could fit well for the Bengals who are interested in being in a place like Cincinnati. So kind of two parts to it, Mike. Before I get to those guys, the first part is, do you think maybe cornerback is becoming more and more of a need as we think about it? Like, is the secondary maybe being overlooked in terms of like where the cornerback position falls on mock drafts? And if not, why do you think that's the case?
Well, because they spent a high draft pick last year on it, and they drafted a safety and a corner, and they do have a corner in Mike Hilton, and he plays nickel, but I mean he's part of their depth chart, and so they've got all their starters. So I think that's why it plays low. I mean, you're not going to draft somebody and slot them into the starting lineup right now. I think you do need starters at other positions. So I mean, that's why I think it's lower on boards. I mean, if they found somebody in the first round, like if somebody slipped, like one of the top corners, in the draft, then maybe you take somebody just because you're in a position where you could take the best player available at 28. Neither Forbes or Phillips fits that description. So I don't know. I wouldn't tend to do that just because I think that um, it's just not a position where you need to slot in right now. I know Chidobe Awuzie is coming back from that torn ACL, and you want to have some insurance, but I'm not sure that that's a first round pick that I would sort of love, just because I think that they need to get over the hump for a Super Bowl. They don't need to worry about down the line or things like that. They need to win now, and I don't know that that pick sort of fits the bill there.
So what if, well, I think with the first round it makes sense because you'd rather go for, even though I don't think they'll be available, you want someone maybe like a Keely Ringo, or if somehow he's available, Joey Porter Jr., who I think is an interesting guy because he reminds me a lot of Richard Sherman. I think, yeah, in that case that makes sense. But let's say you get to this, maybe not second round. I think in this case, third, fourth round, you have either one of those two on the board. They haven't performed yet in the combine. They're going to perform later this week. They show off their stuff, especially Forbes, being the taller corner. Phillips is a little bit kind of under 5'9". I mean, if they show you something good and you already see what they have on tape and you've already talked to someone like Forbes, do you go for someone like that? If they're available in that third, fourth round, if you haven't gotten a cornerback already to kind of add to that insurance you mentioned?
Well, it's kind of silly to speculate now because we have the free agency coming up. So I mean, that's going to have such a huge impact. Like, they don't take a tight end if they don't sign Hayden Hurst, they need to get it, and they don't sign anybody else. They got to take a draft. They got to take a tight end of the draft. So I mean, like, and
Right.
then you kind of go down the list of positions. Like, what if they re-sign Eli Apple? They don't need a corner. I mean, I wouldn't draft a corner at all. So I think you have to be careful in terms of like projecting out because free agency is going to, I think, change the game. If they were to cut Joe Mixon, like, they don't re-sign Hayden Hurst and they cut Joe Mixon, you're going to look running back tight end 1-2, and so I think that's kind of where my head's at. I'm waiting to kind of see what some of these roster decisions are, because that, I think, really will set sort of the agenda for the draft. I think we'll know probably what, in 2 weeks time, 2.5 weeks time,
Yeah.
better about what their draft plans are. And not for nothing, the coaching staff was very specific about how they're just jumping into this. So it's there's a long road ahead. They've got a lot of work to do to kind of catch up on scouting these guys and figuring out what they like and kind of meshing that with what the scouting staff and do Tobin want. So yeah, I think it's way too early to sort of say one way or the other. I'd lean no, but I mean, things can change in free agency. If they do sign some free agents at those positions, then maybe cornerback's a luxury you can invest in.
Well, the beauty of this podcast and mock drafts is we can overproject or underproject all we want. But I do agree when you say that if there's a world where you do bring back Eli Apple and you don't bring back Hayden Hurst, or you don't restructure Joe Mixon and he's out the door, then of course, it's, again, if you don't bring back Hurst and you don't bring back Mixon, it's tight end, running back, tight end, whatever order. It's those positions at least you prioritize. But then I think even then, if you get that 1-2 punch of filling tight end and running back, and you don't re-sign Eli Apple and or Trey Flowers, I don't think it's, again, this is super early, but this is why we have fun with it. I think in that third, fourth round, you can look at those guys. There's other names, obviously, I didn't mention. I just mentioned them as an example of sort of that middle round tier of cornerbacks they could look at. There's other names we'll talk about, down the road, especially as the combine wraps up. But those are just ones I wanted to hit on today because they have direct relevance to the Bengals. When we come back, we're going to focus more in-house with the Bengals. We've talked about Joe Mixon being restructured, potentially. Is he the only one who might be up for being restructured? Plus, what could the AFC North look like with some interesting controversy in the division? We'll tell you about all of that when we return on the Strictly Stripes podcast. Hey there, it's Muhammad Ahmad from the Strictly Stripes podcast. You might be wondering, what exactly is Cincinnati Football Insider? Well, it's a community of fans who want the inside scoop on the Bengals and a direct connection to the Strictly Stripes podcast and the reporters who cover the team, and that would be me, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Neislick. It works like this. Andrew, Mike, and I will text your phone a few times a day with breaking news, analysis, and our insights on the Bengals. It's the inside scoop on what we're hearing, and we'll give you the inside word before it even hits social media. Being an insider is the best way to participate with the podcast and get in on special events and Zoom calls with me, Mike, and Andrew. And the best part is you can text us directly. It's a great way to cut through the clutter of Facebook, Twitter, other social media, and avoid the trolls for just $4.99 a month. Still not sure? Well, just try it for 2 weeks, and if you don't like it, you can text the word STOP at any time, but you won't want to cancel once you join the community of hardcore Bengals fans. Here's the best way to get on board. Go to cleveland.com/Bengals, click on the blue banner at the top of the page, or if it's easier, text 513-940-4193. It's a great time to try the 2 weeks free, as we'll be reporting live from the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. Plus, we'll be covering free agency on the way to the NFL Draft in April. Give us a try for 2 weeks and see what you think. Just text this number again. It's 513-940-4193 and become an insider today. And thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast on this fine Thursday night. So we've talked about it a lot, and we talked about it earlier in this podcast because this is a conversation not going away anytime soon, and that is, do you let Joe Mixon walk? Do you restructure his deal? You and I, and even though Andrew's not with us, would all agree that he's not worth the $13 million or whatever he's supposed to make the next year, 2 years, whatever. But I was thinking, and we're talking about this in the grand scheme of a Joe Burrow contract extension era. You could restructure Mixon so that you keep him, keep that leadership, keep whatever he brings, the efficiency that they like. But you could also restructure, I think, and tell me if I'm crazy because I just thought of this, Trey Hendrickson is also a big cap hit for the next 2 years. Do you restructure him? Do you work something out where you don't let go of a guy like that, because that's the last thing you want to do. Like, cutting him is way off the table, especially going into this season. But do you consider restructuring that deal, whether or not you restructure Joe Mixon, or does one kind of depend on the other? Or is that not even an idea worth considering?
Well, yeah, I don't know that he'd be open to that just because his production has been really good the last 2 years. That, typically I think that'd be a tough approach. I think you're looking at guys. Maybe how much does Hendrickson have? He's 2 years, right?
Yes, he has 2 years
2 years
remaining on a
left.
4-year deal.
So I think guys like Tyler Boyd, more veteran types, that might help you out a little bit. I think him, and I think obviously Joe Mixon. Those kind of are the two I think that jump out to me. That you might try to restructure because you want to keep Tyler Boyd, I think. But obviously with the receiver money going elsewhere, things are tightening up. But those are the two to me that would make a lot of sense.
So you're talking about kind of how Tyler Boyd is important, which I agree with. But he is also, like you said, he's about a $10.5 million cap hit next year. So would you restructure him before, obviously before Hendrickson, but would you restructure Boyd before you restructure Joe Mixon, or do you deal with Joe Mixon first and then maybe decide if it's worth restructuring Tyler Boyd?
Well, I think it depends how much money they need, right?
Right.
They could cut Tyler Boyd easily and save
True.
quite a bit of money. I think it's like
Save 9
$8.9,
million.
yeah, $9 million. I don't think they want to do that, but it's an area of savings possibly. So I think you got to figure out how much you need, right? And the Joe Burrow deal will kind of dictate that if they extend T now. And because it doesn't sound like they're gonna splurge in free agency either. Just based on what Duke Tobin said.
Right.
They'll fill out the roster and pay what spend what they need to spend. But in terms of like looking at a top tier kind of free agent, that's not necessary. They're more interested in obviously extending their own guys, and that's where a lot of their money is going to go. So it'll just depend. I think how much they need. if guys can agree, if Mixon agrees, is that enough? I mean, do they need multiple guys? How much can they extend that cap hit out for Joe Burrow? And what does the escalators look like? It's kind of up in the air, but I mean, we'll obviously know here in the next couple of weeks, what guys they kind of approach and kind of their strategy for things. They said all options, no door is closed, I think is what he said. So
He did.
Duke Tobin, that is. So we'll see.
You talk about, and this alludes to what Duke Tobin said, you're not building for the future. I mean, you are, but like the near future is what's important. The near future is winning Super Bowl 58. After you were in Super Bowl 56 and you nearly got back to Super Bowl 57, you want to win now. And I think when we talk about, do you restructure Tyler Boyd? Do you save 9 million releasing him? Where do you apply the same principle to Joe Mixon? I think the important thing, and the Bengals know this, but it's just worth establishing this. As much as Boyd and Mixon are like tenured guys who bring a lot to the locker room, it's important not to get hung up on feelings. Like, if it means you have to release them or restructure it, then of course they have to agree to be restructured unless they get cut. Like, you have to do what's best. It would be difficult. It wouldn't be easy. And Duke Tobin said, like, it would be difficult, seeing guys walk in free agency, or, I mean, if they were to hypothetically do any of those restructures or releases, like, it's difficult. It's tough because, like, it can be a personal business, especially when those guys made the impact being team captains, for as long as they've been while they've been in Cincinnati. So it's difficult, but it's important not to get hung up on that. And I think for people trying to make those predictions, as much as it's so hard to speculate because we don't know what Joe Burrow's deal looks like, we don't know what's going to happen in free agency, like you said, and we don't know if that affects getting a cornerback a little higher in the draft versus, oh, do you get a tight end because you don't have Hayden Hurst? The beauty and the struggle of the offseason is you don't know until you know. You don't know until you know. But I think I wanted to kind of talk more about the division because there's something I've been thinking about. And I was talking with Andrew Gels about this earlier, and I want to get his thoughts on this tomorrow too. But I'm sure you saw, although it's been deleted since, I have a screenshot, so I want to read it. Rashad Bateman is not very happy with the Ravens front office. He basically quote tweeted their general manager and was like, "You need to stop pointing the finger at us and stop pointing it at Lamar Jackson. We take the heat 24/7. Keep us healthy, blah, blah, blah." I think it was in response to maybe the grades that came out on the facilities of teams, how they treat the families of the players, the nutrition, trainers, all of that. So you have your wide receiver who's not happy, and he deleted the tweet, but kind of doubled down later. Lamar Jackson's still not inked, and that's going to be one of the biggest talks of the NFL. I mean, what is happening in Baltimore? Like, is that culture just melting? Like, what is happening, and what does that mean for the AFC North if you can't keep Lamar and Rashad Bateman's not happy and you got other issues in house?
Well, I mean, it depends. I think if they cave in and give all that guaranteed money, I think that, I mean, I view it that Baltimore would be in trouble that way. To be honest, I think they should hold firm, and not invest like that. I don't think that's a smart idea. And so, to me, I think it's John Harbaugh's team. He's a good coach. He has a good history, solid resume. I mean, they seem to really want Lamar Jackson, but I think it all comes down to that decision and how things are handled. I think they might be better off. The team's always been kind of one with the defense, and they weren't far off last year without Lamar. So I mean, you need to obviously get a better quarterback than they had, but also, throwing all like $50 million, I think really upsets that roster, and that imbalance could really hurt them down the line. The culture stuff, the player being disgruntled, it happens. What are you going to do?
What are you gonna do, right? I mean, hey, if in defense of the Ravens, I guess to counter that, I mean, you had Carlos Dunlap, who was even worse, I think, in that sense, 2 years ago. There's a reason why he's not in Cincinnati anymore, but I don't know. I think obviously, I mean, we could go on and on about Lamar, but that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day because I mean, really nothing has happened with that situation. But I wanted to get your thoughts on one last thing and then to kind of set the stage for the workouts Friday and to kind of talk about what we're going to have with Andrew. Did you see he played for Georgia, as you obviously know, linebacker slash defensive end Nolan Smith. Have you seen his numbers, Mike? I want to tell the listeners about this, but have you seen his numbers from his combine results today?
Just I thought he ran a 4.4 or something like that.
Well, they updated it. It was unofficially a 4.44. It was a 4.39. That is freaky. Like he's a 6'3", 230-ish pound defensive end. That's unbelievable. And it's not even just him. Byron Young from Tennessee, 4.43. So not even a fifth of a second, or I guess 0.05 seconds behind him. I mean, talk about speed. I mean, that's freaky. That's faster than some running backs and wide receivers. I think that's even faster than heck a lot of cornerbacks. I mean, he killed that drill among the defensive ends. His vertical was also tops because he had a 41.5-inch vertical. Again, tall, the highest among all defensive ends. I'm talking defensive ends, not defensive linemen overall. I mean, I don't want to say. I mean, I know what the answer is going to be, but I'm just going to say it to wrap up this podcast because I just love to have fun and be reckless. But if somehow you keep Hayden Hurst, you keep Joe Mixon, it's late first round. Like the Bengals are pick 28 because Noah Smith was kind of like a super late first round, early second round kind of projected pick. I mean, with numbers like that, if I mean, he's gonna go up, but if somehow, some way he's still there, and the Bengals have a chance to take him, do you at least right now in March, do you entertain that idea? When you see numbers like that, and this is assuming you have Hayden Hurst, you have Joe Mixon, and you can get a cornerback like I mentioned later in the draft.
Well, I think that he was projected out as a better prospect at defensive end, or fits better in a 3-4 system instead of a base 4-3. And you know how much the Bengals coaching staff kind of values those sort of projections or positional kind of kind of outlook. So like a guy like Miles Murphy from Clemson is kind of more in the mold of the pass rusher they'd be looking for. But the physical tools are obviously a big part of it. I think he'll certainly go up on draft boards because of those numbers. Obviously he made himself some money this week, and that's kind of what you want to do. You want to avoid catastrophe, and if possible, if you do that, I mean, you're really helping yourself. So, and then in prime time, and obviously people are talking about it. So good for him. Obviously made the most of his 2 months training.
There's actually some other names on this list that I won't get to today because, again, I don't want to do an hour-long podcast, but these are some names I want to talk about tomorrow and throughout the coming days because these are guys who already worked out with Nolan Smith. These are defensive ends and actually some D tackles. So tomorrow, I want to talk more about those guys. We'll preview a lot of the running backs in the draft because running backs will be speaking tomorrow. Andrew Gillis, again, he's in Indy right now. He'll be there for part of tomorrow. So he'll join us with kind of what he gets from them and the tight ends. Tight ends are also available from what I'm seeing. So he'll kind of give his thoughts on maybe some fits the Bengals could look at that we haven't talked about at those positions. And we'll keep talking about other free agency topics and tying back to what the coaches talked about this week in Indianapolis that we haven't touched on already. And much, much, much more because this is, like I said it again, the beauty and the difficulty of the offseason. You don't know till you know, but we know you'll join us tomorrow, and we can't wait to see you on this Friday. Once again, for myself and Mike Neislick, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. Catch you Friday. Enjoy your Thursday night.